Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I hope you are doing well, and thank you so much for joining us. We got, even though this hasn't been the same kind of flurry of activity in terms of what we were talking about last week, it's still been kind of a busy time for the Bengals, and there's still a lot to talk about, and we have plenty to get to tonight. And I'm joined by the king of the desserts over in Ohio. Scott, missed you last week, my friend. I had to fly solo, and even when you weren't here, I was still struggling with scratchy audio. So you were missed, my friend. But aside from that, you were missed for your insight and everything. For those who've been tuning into this program for a while, they probably know that Scott likes his sweets, and before we got on the air, he was ranting about his favorite place, Dairy Queen. So it wouldn't be an episode of OBI without Scott some dessert talk, right, buddy?
Yeah, except it was a negative rant because the chocolate ice cream is not working, and I don't know how. That is like the core of your business is vanilla and chocolate, and you don't have chocolate. And it's not like it was just like one time; it was like 2 weeks straight, but. Yeah, during Lent, I've been going on Sunday, and for 2 straight Sundays, like, the weekly, like you're building up to it all week. You get there, you're like, oh yeah, we haven't fixed that. Yeah, kind of like football. I mean, you build up to the Sunday game, like you expect a high quality, high effort, and then when they play flat, you're like, oh, you're kidding me. But anyway,
right. Well, nobody's perfect, my friend. Not even the illustrious Dairy Queen.
Yeah, I had to go to one of their competitors a couple weeks ago because I was just.
Oh boy! We better get DQ on the horn and let them see if they can sponsor the program, because that's no bueno. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Again, I'm Anthony Cosenza. He's Scott Schulze. You can get this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, cincyjungle.com, and you can get in touch with us on Twitter at BengalsOBI and via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. We're going to try and get to some listener questions at the end of the show, as we almost always do. And we're gonna start off real quick just with a quick roundup and just talk about a couple of college prospects that the Bengals have recently been linked to. Just for those of you who have not, and if you need a recap of this, go visit cincyjungle.com. They got a pro day tracker, and it shows everything that every place that the Bengals have been, and maybe who some of the players that they're scouting. So check that out. Of late, in terms of the last few days, as we sit here on Wednesday night when we record, probably the most interesting thing was University of Florida's pro day was on Wednesday, and Marvin Lewis was there. Well, that doesn't sound so unusual, except for the fact that the owners' meetings where coaches are present, and Marvin Lewis was present in Tampa Bay, I believe it was, or maybe it was Orlando, but Lewis was there, and he specifically left the meetings to go check out Florida prospects. There's a handful, probably most notable is Taven Bryan, a guy that is a defensive tackle, very athletic, maybe a guy who more fits a 3-4 defensive end kind of mold, but very athletic, potentially a Margus Hunt type in terms of build, not necessarily NFL outlook, but that sort of thing. So that was kind of interesting. And then they've been at Arkansas's pro day. Obviously, Frank Ragnow, the center there, is under the spotlight. They've worked out a couple of position coaches have worked out guys from Louisiana Tech, University of South Florida, and Texas Tech of late. So those are some of the pro days over the last couple of days that the Bengals have been to. In terms of specific visits, obviously there's a handful of those that they get to do with prospects before the draft. Now, a lot of times the Bengals kind of do it one or the other way. It seems as if they either use these on very high guys that are on their board and guys that they intend to take, or guys that are way down the board and they could end up being late picks, college undrafted free agents, which the Bengals have had very good luck with over the past handful of years. So some of those guys, I think it was Northern Indiana University wide receiver, I think it's Doris Fountain, the Washington, Iowa, you're right, excuse me, Northern Iowa University. Washington defensive tackle Vita Vea, often mocked as a top 20 pick, as well as Ohio State linebacker Chris Worley. We talked a little bit before the show began about Worley. You know, you're the resident Buckeye guy here, Scott. I know he's not the most prominent guy, but I from what I understand, valuable locker room guy, kind of a supplemental piece on a good team, right?
Yeah, I think he was from what I recall, basically a senior starter. So someone who had been a backup for his whole career, got a chance to start, had a solid season, some solid numbers. Wasn't a guy, if you watched a lot of Ohio State games, where you came away thinking, wow, like this is the next Chris Spielman or whatever. But, he's one of those guys that I think could be a solid undrafted free agent kind of pick. You look at some of the guys the Bengals have drafted. Obviously, there's a need at linebacker. He's a linebacker. Some of the more late round guys like Hardy Nickerson and Jordan Evans, some of the guys they've kind of targeted later in the draft or undrafted free agents. Someone they could be looking to fill that mold. I think he's 230 pounds, so probably more of an outside linebacker, although he's not very fast for an outside linebacker. But could also be someone they're maybe looking at as a special teams guy, maybe not to be a starter, but someone like the kid they took from Houston last year, or some of their players when they target them more as special teams guys. So I think he definitely has a role in someone's camp this season, this offseason or preseason. It'll be interesting to see where he ends up. And like you said, it's with these visits, it's everyone likes to look at that. We kind of do it every year. We look, okay, the Bengals visited these 20 players. Clearly they're targeting them. That's who they're targeting. And then you look at the draft, and sometimes it could be a higher guy they just pass over totally. And the thing that we don't really get to see is, okay, did they visit them because they're absolutely sold on this guy, or they just want to make sure that someone they can kind of cross off? Is it, we just kind of assume, well, they visited them. Clearly they love them. They're going to reach for them. And yeah, at the end of the day, you never really know. But it is fascinating because until the draft happens, you don't really know what's going to happen. And we have to, find something to entertain ourselves with the team until something substantive happens, which I think is in about 4 weeks.
Yeah, and the reason I kind of brought up some of this stuff because the Arkansas Pro Day, Frank Ragnow, obviously the Bengals now don't have a starting center at this point, unless they shape things up. So that's relevant. Linebacker with Vontaze Burfict's suspension and just an overall need at that position. Worley makes sense, even if he's a late pick, an undrafted free agent, what have you. And then the other one that's talked about a lot, and in terms of where the Bengals may go in one of the first few rounds, is defensive tackle. And I think I'm saying he is one of, if not the best defensive tackle in the game. He's huge. He is disruptive, and he would be kind of the spot next to Geno Atkins. Obviously, Atkins is kind of that smaller and shorter defensive tackle that can get a little bit more after the quarterback. He's still stout against. He rushes the passer well. Villa kind of he for his size, I think he's about 340 pounds. He gets after the passer pretty well. He's pretty disruptive. Obviously not a pass rusher, but obviously teaming with Atkins, he would be. I mean, that's a formidable defense. And obviously the Huskies have been pretty good the last couple of years. He's a part of the reason why. And by the way, the Bengals finished 30th against the run last year. So my thought, I'd love to get your thoughts on Villa anyway, Scott, but my thought in general, I don't want to say I know, I totally know at this point, but I'm thinking at least one of those first two picks has to be invested on the front seven on the defense, right? I mean, I'm thinking kind of offensive line, front seven.
I think a lot of that probably happens with what happens with their contract extensions, because you look at guys who are going to be free agents after next year. Geno Atkins, Carlos Dunlap, and Michael Johnson, who have all been, long tenured fixtures on the Bengals front seven, front four defensive line, other than the 1 year Johnson was in Tampa Bay. I think Atkins and Dunlap have been there for 8 years straight. I think Johnson's been there for what, maybe 9 or 8, if you minus that year, whatever it is. They've been there for a heck of a long time, all starting all together. They are getting up there. Johnson and Dunlap, I think, or Atkins and Dunlap, I think, will both be 30 next year. Johnson's already 31, so he'll be 32 next year. You kind of assume, okay, of the 3, Johnson probably is let go, or maybe he comes back next year on a 1-year, 2-year kind of team-friendly deal if they bring him back. And that's assuming they don't plan on replacing him with, those 2 guys they drafted, such as Carl Lawson last year. But that being said, they probably aren't going to pay all 3. You look at Dunlap, he signed a very team-friendly deal a few years back. He's overplayed it, overproduced. He's been a wonderful player. That he's not one of these Odell Beckhams. He's kind of complaining and moaning, oh my gosh, I'm overpaid, or I'm underpaid. I want more. He's been very good about, not complaining and grumbling about the contract he signed. But that being said, I fully expect that when he is a free agent next year, he's going to be saying, okay, someone show me the money. Knowing the Bengals is probably not going to be them. So you're possibly losing him. Geno Atkins, you obviously, I think Bengals fans hope he's a Bengal forever. But if he goes, you obviously have a need there. And he's, as you mentioned, Vita Vea isn't exactly the Geno Atkins type of player. He's more your zero technique, your nose tackle, not your penetrating type. And so then you kind of have to look at, okay, what do the Bengals have at defensive tackle? They have, they signed the guy from Tampa for a 1-year deal who might be a great move, might not. He was really good in Washington, so you don't know what you have in him. Billings is still super young. I think he's only 20. So obviously there's a lot of potential yet to be tapped with him as far as his production, his play. He's obviously the same kind of role as Vita would be, one of those bigger, big, strong guys, big space eater kind of guys right in the middle. And you have Ryan Glasgow, who played quite a bit last year and seemed pretty good in his backup role. They let that sense. So yeah, I think a big question is, okay, looking at where does this team seed their front 7 in a year or two? And you kind of look at what they did with Obuehi and Fisher. They kind of knew that at some point Whitworth might be gone, Andre Smith might be gone. Let's get those guys in place. So I think depending on how they draft this year with the front 7, I think that will really tell us what they think is going to happen with those guys. If they think they're going to be bringing it back on contracts, or if they, grab someone like Vita and maybe a defensive end, maybe that tells us that, yeah, they fully expect that when these contracts are up after 2018, Atkins, Dunlap, and Johnson could all be walking.
Yeah, regular listener Christopher Higdon in the live YouTube chat. And by the way, if you have some questions for later in the show, leave them there. Hit us up on Twitter at BengalsOBI. We're keeping an eye on email as well. Steel.com. Christopher Higdon in the live YouTube chat says, I have a feeling we'll trade down again from number 21. Maybe New England comes up from 31 and gives us number 43. Well, yeah, I mean, that's I don't know so much about the second statement. I mean, that kind of however that plays out. But moving back definitely is a possibility. We've seen the Bengals do it in a year that they desperately need an offensive guard, and there were 2 really good ones in 2012. What'd they do? They had David DeCastro sitting in their lap. They moved back and got Kevin Zeitler, and they garnered another pick. Now, again, I don't know that they already have 11 picks again this year. I don't know if this is a team that needs, if they get, another pick or whatever, I don't know if they need 12 new players on the team. I mean, they could use definitely some new talent. So what they may need to do is if they do move back in the first, maybe they continue to do some things in the second round, the third round, package picks, and continue to move up and get some guys that can help them now. But Vea is a guy that could help them right away. And even though Andrew Billings is there and they seem to like him, he was kind of a little bit of a disappointment last year in his real first year playing. So, obviously they're looking to improve however they can. And run defense in this division is paramount. The Ravens, the name of the young man last year, I escapes me at the moment, but he was one of the best runners in terms of rushing attack by Pro Football Focus standards. Obviously, there's Le'Veon Bell. Saquon Barkley may end up in Cleveland along with Duke Johnson. So, you got to stop the run. And the Bengals did not do that last year, and it was a big reason why they were not successful. And Vea may be a guy that they take at 21. Maybe they move up and get it, one of these linebackers, Roquan Smith, Tremaine Edmonds, whoever, or maybe they move back and really restock the offensive defense goes, because he could or could not be a 3-down lineman. He definitely has more, I think, right away talent in that front than Billings, but he's still that big 340-pound guy that's probably on the field for 2 downs. And I don't know that he's probably a top 15 type of talent. I don't know that you spend such a high pick. I mean, a lot of people thought Billings was going to be a first-round player. He ended up falling to the 4th because of that same stigma. So we'll see, but obviously something to keep an eye on. And this show might as well be called the Orange and Black Segway Show, because we are the kings of the Segway. Good friend Michael Myers says free safety would be a nice move. Move George Aloka back to strong safety. Well, Scott, I don't know if you've been reading the Cincinnati Enquirer or some of the other beat writers out there, but there seems to be, and if you remember a few weeks back towards the Combine, the Bengals really courted Kurt Coleman, who ended up a safety, who ended up signing with the Saints. There seems to be this, even after they gave George Aloka a big extension a couple of years ago, same thing with Sean Williams, there might be this prevailing opinion that the Bengals are either looking to bolster a rotational safety in with those guys, or potentially move one of those guys out of a starting role and help out. Since those 2 guys have signed their respective contracts, they have not really stepped up the same way that they played back in 2015 and such. So there's 2 positions that I think are kind of lurking on the periphery that the Bengals might need to address, and most fans either don't realize it or don't think so or what have you. I want to start with the safety position and your thoughts on that. There are some interesting names out there. I think Kenny Vaccaro, former first-round pick, is still lingering out there in terms of safeties who could be lingering out there. But your thoughts on the safety position as the Bengals go forward in 2018 and those big deals that they gave both Williams and Aloka?
Yeah, as far as the safeties, one of the big things is other than Darrell Williams, they have never really seemed to target safety early in the draft. And now, granted, anything's up for grabs up until they drafted Zeitler. I think they'd never drafted a guard in the first round. So nothing saying they can't break out of the tradition. That looking at PFF, because it's an easy way to assign a number, and people more or less seem to accept it. I don't think it's perfect by any means, but I think it's we've debated PFF before, but just looking at PFF for Aloka and Williams, they're both rated in the 77, 79 range this year, which is fairly decent. It's not a great grade. By comparison, William Jackson was an 89, Drake Kirkpatrick was a 56. So it kind of shows you they were a little above average or whatever. So I think what the Bengals have right now are a pair of solid, stable safeties. I think they're probably both free safeties. I think Reggie Nelson was both strong safeties. I think Reggie Nelson was a really good free safety. After he left, I think they're kind of masquerading one of them as a free safety, even though I don't think either one's really fitted for that. So I think if they did get one, I'd like to see them pursue more of a, someone that plays the ball, more of a free safety type. That being said, if they don't get a safety, I can't say it's a huge need, because I think we have stable, decent players. Are they great players? Are they Pro Bowlers? No. Are they, by no means, I don't think anyone's going to argue they're elite players. They obviously have their issues. Sean Williams has had some great plays. He's had some horrible plays. Aloka seems like a guy. He's a decent guy. They could definitely stand to upgrade. Just looking at the number of holes this team still has on the offensive line, they are still struggling to find a young number 2 to play opposite AJ Green. You mentioned all the issues with stopping the runners last year, with linebackers. If they target a need, there's definitely a bigger need than safety. But, if they got a safety, I don't think any Bengals fans would be complaining, saying, "Oh, how in the heck can you're not going to replace these guys? They're so great." And that they're not great, but they're who they are. They are serviceable. And that being said, it's very interesting you mentioned about Kenny Vaccaro stuff out there. I remember when he was drafted by, I think it was by the Saints 4 years ago. Many people in Cincy Jungle wanted the Bengals to get him. We were very desperate for safeties, and he was a guy that people were saying, hey, it was a couple years back, guys like him. There was Matt Elam. There was a kid from, I think, one of the Air Florida schools that people were really high on.
Eric Reed.
Yeah, and there was one other guy that people were really, I can't think of his name. If I heard name back, oh yeah, that's the, but anyway, there were several guys that folks were really high on us drafting that we never drafted. And Vaccaro is out there, and it's kind of interesting, and you kind of wonder how much of it is Eric Reed, because of some of the stuff with him and Kaepernick. And is he kind of the guy that's setting the market and no one's grabbing a safety because they want to wait until Reed gets signed, if he gets signed, because people are kind of I've heard some people say, well, some teams don't want to sign him because of some of the stances he's made with the anthem. And if he's kind of the top player, generally once the top free agents go and set the market, kind of like when they sign first round draft picks, once that first round guy, this first few people sign, everyone else kind of slots in place. Well, it's hard to slot everyone else in place if that top guy hasn't signed yet. So it kind of makes you wonder, would the Bengals be looking at someone like a Vaccaro or Reed, or are they pretty well set that we have who we have? And if we enter the season with Williams and I look at his starting safeties, I think we could probably all agree it's not one of the Bengals' strongest positions, but I don't think it's a screaming necessity that they're just, horrible back there.
Yeah, and oddly enough, I think Eric Reed's brother is coming out in the draft as a free safety and is one of the top talents in this year's draft at that position. He is a free safety. Justin Reed and he's from Stanford. Second ranked free safety in this year's class by CBS Sports, and some people even think this program has put out on Twitter that he thinks that Justin Reed might be a guy that the Bengals end up looking at number 21. I don't know. They could look at safety. That the issue is, the money that they have tied up in these guys. So, but it is a position that's worth, it's very strange. They haven't really traditionally valued that position as a franchise yet. They've invested heavy money on some mid to lower round picks in Aloka and Williams, who have been viable starters. But it's just it's something that we'll have to monitor. The Bengals, I think the Bengals, if they add somebody, is going to probably be a veteran of some kind. But I think the early rounds are probably going to be reserved for those of the roster, both lines, linebacker, that sort of thing. But we'll see. The other position, Scott, that some folks may not think that the Bengals need, but is kind of there's some other things out there. Marvin Lewis recently made it known at the owners' meetings that he wants to kind of really reestablish the run game. Obviously, that takes offensive linemen and effective offensive linemen to do that. They lost kind of their quote-unquote thumper back in Jeremy Hill, term a little loosely. And so now it's kind of up to Joe Mixon and Giovanni Bernard, okay? And it should be. Those are two very talented guys. Joe Mixon showed some great things last year. He showed some things last year. Gio has been a great multidimensional back. The problem is Joe Mixon got hurt last year. Giovanni Bernard has been hurt at times in his career. Now I think Cedric Pierman is also a free agent, a guy that's been a special. Is running back a spot that the Bengals might need to look at, not in the first round, maybe not even in the second round, but maybe third round, fourth round?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head a little bit ago when you mentioned the 11 picks. They just have way too many picks. And we saw that last year where the picks they drafted all these guys and then, they let the Jake Elliott's, J.J. Dielmans, the et cetera, they released them, our team scooped them up because they had no spot for them. They had more players than they brought more young rookies into camp than that they could physically, fit on a roster, especially when they got down to cut down day. When they had to get down to that 53 and Marvin loves his veterans, you knew of all these guys they drafted, there's only a small number they're actually going to keep, which means most of your picks are essentially wasted. I mean, they ended up being glorified camp bodies that got fans excited because they were young and good. But at the end of the day, they were, we got some in the back on practice squad, whatever, but not all of them. That being said, you're entering this year with 11 picks. You know that, come September 1st, whenever cut down day is, 6 months from now, they're not going to have all 11 picks on the roster. They're just like last year, you may have 5 or 6 make the team. So instead of using those R5 picks on something kind of silly, like players that they're not going to, that have no chance of making this roster because it's a 10th wide receiver or a 5th running back or a 4th. Why not, package some of them, move up. And even if they don't want to move up from 21, move up those 2nd round picks, 3rd round picks, pick at 40 instead of 50, pick at, 50 instead of 70. Do those kind of things. If there's that guy you see there, and not the Marcus Hunt types, but, a guy who's good. If you see a guy that you actually think is a good player, move up. I mean, they did that with Russell Bodine. Obviously, it failed because he wasn't a good prospect, but they still were willing to move up. And that's the thing is that, I think you have to turn those picks. Like you just can't hold your picks for the sake of holding them and letting the guys go 6 months from now. You have to, I think you should get better value for those picks by getting better quality players on your roster by ensuring you're getting those guys you want to get. So that being said, you look at something like running back. I think we'd probably both be in agreement. Most Bengals fans would be in agreement. The guys who are going to get, 95% of the snaps are already on the roster, and they're pretty good. Joe Mixon, I think, with any sort of blocking, is a great player. With god-awful blocking like last year, is a decent player. He is able to make people miss. There's very exciting things he can do. Ever since I did the scouting report for him last year, I've just been excited about this guy possibly being a Bengal. When he became a Bengal, I've been, big fan of his. That being said, you're only one injury away from losing him. And then your backup, as you mentioned, is Giovanni Bernard, who also has his own injury histories. They're very similar as far as like the size. Neither one's like a big thumper. And you look at our fullback, it's, Ryan Hewitt, who's more of an H-back type. We don't have that, that Chris Presley, that John Connor, that guy that Jeremy Hill kind of was, that 235 plus guy that, you're at 4th and 1, a couple inches away, like, in the Super Bowl back in 1988 or whatever, and you need those 2-3 inches to get that touch. You don't have that guy that you can say, this guy's absolutely going to do it. We have a pair of very elusive, shifty guys that are going to make you miss in space and look silly, but you need to push that 340-pound. The other team has Vita Vea at 345-pound defensive lineman. He just bowled over, T.J. Johnson or whoever we're having pretending to play center. And your running back needs to, push his butt out of the way and get in the end zone. I don't think that's Mixon or Giovanni Bernard's forte. And I'm not quite sure that's even Hewitt's forte. And, okay, Dalton might be able to lean. He'll get pushed back because the centers and the guards are going to get blown up. That 4th and 1, you need that guy. He's not going to get a lot of snaps. He's not going to be a guy you use in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd round with your draft picks. But I would say somewhere in the draft, if they draft a guy at running back, that's probably the one position they're definitely lacking, is that random usage, that John Kuhn kind of guy that they had in Green Bay, that you're just a bit, that's Kuhn. You're going to, and you're going to have all the fans chant because when he comes out there on that play, that is the only thing he's doing. The defense knows it. The offense knows it. He's going to average 1.1 yards a carry or whatever it is. But when you need that, those 6 inches or whatever, get that first or get that touchdown, that's the guy you're giving it to. With the way the Bengals roster is set up now with their linemen and the running backs, that 4th and 1 is going to be a pitch to the outside. You hope the defense doesn't read it, and you hope the linebacker doesn't, sprint through that gap and tackle you 4 yards in the backfield. And you want to be able to, to push that pile with that big guy. And that's the guy they don't have. I don't think they need a 3rd down back, the elusive, the scat, but the guys that are the higher athletic, because you have that. You have 2 very good ones that are both 2nd round picks. They've both proven they are solid players, and with any sort of blocking can probably be great players. So if anything, I think it's that or the special teams guy. And the special teams guy, I think they can probably grab from any position.
Yeah, I mean, the only way they get another guy in the mold of like a Gio Bernard is if it's a guy they have on their board in their third round. They've already taken care of guard, center, linebacker, defensive tackle, and all of a sudden you're sitting in the fifth round, kind of like a quick Christian Westerman thing, and all of a sudden this guy like, oh gosh, this second round talent is sitting in our lap. We've taken care of a lot of needs already. Let's just grab this guy. Why not? But I agree, and I don't think, again, I'm not advocating the Bengals spend yet another second round pick on running back, but I think they do need some sort of viable option behind those guys. Joe Mixon, 1 year, he missed a couple, Giovanni Bernard, injury history, and they want to pound the rock. Marvin Lewis said so. And, to Michael Myers' point in the live YouTube chat, fixing this line makes me excited to see Mixon play. I think Mixon can do it all. I think he can be a pounder. I think he can be an elusive guy. But I also think that he was, he suffered at the hands of poor blocking last year and poor usage of the fullback. And maybe he's not even a guy who uses a fullback. Maybe he's more of a spread offense next to the quarterback, that type of thing. By the way, this is a great comment by Dean Burke. The Bengals don't have too many draft picks. They just can't figure out who the right guys to cut are. I absolutely love that comment because it is spot on. Even though Dean wins the Devil's Advocate of the Night award, that's a great comment, and that has been the Achilles heel of the Bengals in terms of winning a play in the last couple of years. But great comment there by Dean. What do you think about the safety and running back positions? You can get in touch with us and let us know. We're on iTunes. We're on SoundCloud. We're on YouTube. All of our content is on cincyjungle.com. And you can get in touch with the show on Twitter at BengalsOBI and OBinsider@gmail.com. Go ahead, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you haven't, I think we had like 9 or 10 subscribers just over the last couple of days, which was awesome. Leave us a rating in the iTunes channel there if you can, and we appreciate all the support. It's pretty cool here, and talk about the Bengals, and you guys actually care about what we have to say. It's pretty cool. Makes me feel smarter than I actually am, Scott. I don't know about you, but I don't know. Moving on, Scott, you have put up a pretty fun series. Some people have this weird stigma about blogs and all of that because blogs aren't, quote, real news or whatever the case may be. But you do have, present company excluded, myself, you do have some smart people working at those types of sites and know what they're doing, and put out a lot of great analysis, commentary, video clips, all of that. But one of the things that's also kind of cool about blogs, as opposed to beat writers and newspapers and all of that cover a sports team, is that you get to sometimes vote on things. You get to comment on a lot of things. You get to voice your opinion as a fan, even though you may not write for the site or anything like that. You get to do that. Scott Schulze, my esteemed co-host, has come up with quite a few posts on cincyjungle.com. Well, a couple now, I think. There's going to be a series rolling out. And he's talking about, and if you haven't checked it out, it's pretty cool stuff. He's talking about the young talent on the Bengals roster as we sit here now before this draft. Obviously, this is probably going to be re-examined maybe this time next year or whatever, but ranking the best young players on the Bengals roster. And I think you have narrowed it down to guys who are obviously this rookie class, who we don't even know is going to be in it, notwithstanding, guys who are entering their third year or younger.
Correct.
So guys who have been drafted in 2016 or undrafted, whatever the case may be. Those guys, okay? So give us some background on this, and then I think we're going to do a little fun game with this.
So I actually, I'd like to take credit for this idea. I actually found it on a baseball site, And with baseball, there's obviously, minor leagues, like 5 or 6 levels of rookie ball, A ball, so on up to all the way to the majors. And within that, you have so many players, pitching and, the offensive players, the positional players. So it's very easy to put together a list of, hey, who are whatever team's best prospects? Because they have several hundred in their system. And I thought, why can't we do something similar, for the Bengals? Obviously, they don't have a minor league team, and we don't know who they're drafting yet. But we can look at those young players, the guys who are still kind of coming up, who you have been in the league for 2 years or less, who are kind of that, on the cusp of becoming starters and becoming regulars for the Bengals. So it's basically, the Cincy Jungle, and I'll put a plug for. I assume most of our listeners visit Cincy Jungle, which is where a lot of our content is written and published. And if they're not, definitely go there. A lot of great articles. One of the things I love about Cincy Jungle, and this is, I guess, my plug for them. So if they want to send me some coupons for dessert or cash or whatever for saying this, it's a great site. One of the great things is the comments.
Dessert, of course. Dessert.
I love the comment section, unlike most blogs, because one, it's very easy to know who you're replying to and make comments it's not just a list, like it's a embedded list, so you can kind of see who you're writing to, who you're applying. And everyone who comments, it's not like your internet troll types. Like, there are very wonderful, very insightful, very intelligent, devoted fans who comment, who are very passionate in their opinions and their views. And it's a great, anyway, yeah, onto the site. So I decided, well, let's have the community vote. And we have a voting option, we have a poll. So I decided to do is, I think a week ago, we came out with, okay, here's a list of who I consider the top 5, 6, 7 prospects. Let's vote and pick who number 1 is. And the voting was overwhelmingly in favor of William Jackson, the cornerback, second-year cornerback from Houston, who was a starter late last year, had a very good season. Like PFF, who I mentioned earlier, rated him as like the number 6 or 7 overall cornerback in the whole NFL. He shut Antonio Brown down when the Steelers played them, Bengals a couple times. Overwhelming number 1 guy. So this week it was, okay, let's vote for number 2. We take him out. We look at who's left, the next 5 or 6 guys. And not surprisingly, Joe Mixon and Carl Lawson have been the top 2 vote getters by a landslide. Joe Mixon is currently leading that by about 55 to 35. So if you're listening to this, watching this, and you think it's Lawson, jump on Cincy Jungle, vote, stack the box for your man. If you think it's Nick Vigil for some reason, if you're related to him, you go jump on and vote for him. I don't know, create 10 different accounts and vote 10 times. But yeah, so anyway, Mixon's leading now. Next week or sometime in the next half week, we'll have another one come out, and the idea, we'll vote for number 3, and we'll vote until we get to a point where we're like, okay, we're voting for 4th-string offensive linemen at this point. We really don't care. So we'll probably come up with like a list, like the top 5 or 10. But it's been very interesting. The debate between Mixon and Lawson has been very interesting to read. I mean, people are very passionate, one or the other. And what I'm really looking forward to is after we get through these top 3, the voting, unsurprisingly, Mixon, Lawson, and William Jackson, not in that order per se, have been the top clear vote getters. But after you get past those 3, where these other guys fall in, the John Ross, the Cody Core, the Nick Vigil, the Alex Erickson, the Jordan Evans, the Billings, when you get to those guys, how does that all sort out? So I'm very much looking forward to seeing who gets voted number 4 next week, because I have no idea who's going to – I had a pretty good idea who 1, 2, and 3 might be. I have no idea who's going to get voted number 4.
Okay, so let's play a little game here, okay? Based on this, and again, cast your votes and sound off on Scott's posts as they go up on Cincy Jungle. Very entertaining and a very fun post, and I think it's not only are we going to have fun with this, but I think it's really relevant because as they enter the draft, as they re-examine what they did in free agency, they are probably sitting here going, okay, how reliable is Andrew Billings? We talked about Vita Vea and their meeting with him. How reliable are the young receivers on this team? How reliable are some of the other players in various, it's a question that's not only fun for the sake of argument on CincyJungle.com and on this program, but it's fun. This is probably a discussion that the Bengals or something similar and how these guys fit into their long-term plans in 2018 and beyond is right smack in the middle, a lot of them, of their rookie contracts and guys that are fighting to get that fifth-year option exercised because that's very lucrative, and guys to get a contract that's very lucrative beyond that, whether it's with the Bengals or elsewhere. So I'm looking at guys who are, again, entering year 3 and younger.
Yes.
I'm looking at a lot of guys. There are guys who played last year. There are guys who didn't play last year. There are guys who came in and barely played and played well last year. So this is really, really interesting to me. Let's go top 5. Who is your number 5 young talent? And again, the caveat being drafted or brought onto the team in 2016 or later. Who is your number 5 young talent on the Bengals at this moment?
I am going to say that my 4 and 5 are definitely up for debate. I mean, if someone watching or listening is going to say I'm crazy for saying my 4 and 5, I totally get that. Like they're still, I mean, they are a work in progress. As of right now, I'd probably say John Ross is my number 5. Just essentially based on upside. I mean, if you base it on production, he's not even in the top 10. I mean, he had 1 fumble and 0 catches last year. That is not top 10 production. He's super injury prone, was injured multiple times in college. If you can't stay healthy, you can't stay on the field. If the coaches don't trust you enough to, granted he's a rookie, so the coaches don't trust him anyway. But if you can't get on the field, you can't stay healthy, can't run the right routes, if you're a healthy scratch rig, but the upside is, you don't use a top 10 pick on a guy because you think he's, garbage. He's blazing fast, but he's not just a straight line guy. He's a good receiver, a good, solid route runner, decent hands. He does have the blazing speed. He's someone who I think he can run more than just that deep route. I think he can run multiple routes in the NFL. So in my mind, I mean, there's guys who've been more productive. Alex Erickson has, Cody Core, Josh Malone. I don't think they have the upside Ross does. Now, whether Ross stays healthy enough to ever see that, I don't know. But as far as a prospect or talent, however you want to dice it, I'd probably put him at 5 right now.
Okay.
So let me ask who you have. Or did you want to?
No. Let's go. We'll go back and forth if you're cool with that.
Okay. Yeah.
There are a lot of. Here's my problem, especially at the back end of this list. There are a lot of guys who either played last year or have been around the team a couple of years, and I really like them. I like the upside. The problem is they haven't had much playing time. Christian Westerman is a guy that I really like in terms of on paper, right? A guy who probably should have been a 2nd or 3rd round pick, fell to the 5th round, has barely even played. It took him to the end of last year. Another guy that was similar deal. I had a real tough time with number 5 for me. Jordan Evans, another guy that I think has high upside. Josh Malone, same thing. I had a real tough time with 5 because I kind of debated between Jordan Willis. I debated between Andrew Billings, and I debated between Tyler Boyd. I went with Tyler Boyd. I was thinking about him today when we were talking about doing this segment, and he's I'm going to steal it from Todd McShay when they drafted him. He's silky smooth. I mean, when he's out there, he runs crisp routes. He makes tough catches. I think unfortunately it's been a byproduct of underutilization, but I think if the Bengals get things right on the offensive line, they could really have something. And whether you use LaFell or, obviously Green's out there, but he is a guy that I like him. I just like him. And, I guess I'm kind of Mike Brownish in the way that I favor skill positions just because they stick out on film sometimes a bit more. But I just like him. And unfortunately, he had a little dip in production last year, mostly because of an injury, and he had a tiny little off-field issue that he ended up being cleared of. So, no problem there. But I think if utilized correctly, he can be a very, very effective weapon. If utilized correctly is the operative term for me.
Yeah, he's an interesting pick. Him and some of the guys you mentioned that you almost went with, like Westerman. I mean, someone on the offensive line, I think I think when you get that point, it's very hard to say this guy's clearly better than that guy. I think Boyd, I think the struggle I have with him is I want to see more. And for whatever reason, like you said, I mean, he has trouble getting open, but he does go over the middle. He makes some difficult catches. He was a guy coming out of college who was a good hands, but then so is Mohamed Sanu. And so I kind of wonder, is he Mohamed Sanu or is he a much better player and they just haven't given him the opportunity? So,
right.
Yeah, very interesting to see.
Yeah, and again, I struggled with putting. I'll get to that. Because I don't want to spoil the rest of my list. We'll save who didn't make my list at the end and go from there. You're number 4, Scott.
My number 4 is a guy who I think is not going to get voted anywhere near number 4. But whenever I do the scouting reports, by the community, by the CJ, like when we do the voting on Cincy Jungle, I think this guy will probably be closer to like 9 or 10. But in my mind, he's. I have him at number 4, and I'm sure I know I'm in the minority on this, but I've noticed when I do a scouting report on certain people, if I really am impressed with them in the scouting reports, I just tend to stubbornly that's my guy, and then especially when they draft them. So there are several guys that did scouting reports on the last few years who they ended up drafting, who I was really high on. So guys like Jake Elliott, Joe Mixon, and Andrew Billings. Andrew Billings, I think has the potential to be a stud. And I mean, he's the thing. It's easy to forget is how young this kid is. Like he's only 20 years old. And I mean, he's going up, he should still be like a sophomore, junior in college. Instead, he's already entering his 3rd year in the NFL. That being said, the production hasn't been there. I mean, obviously his first year he was out. He got injured in that preseason scrimmage or whatever with the Vikings and missed the whole year. This last year, he played very sparingly. In the second half of the year, he got quite a bit more playing time. He, I think, still has some technique, some things to work. I think he's very good about pushing. I mean, he's a big, strong dude who can push big, fat guys out of the way. He can easily get, lost in the middle and get more focus on pushing and not so much on being alert and playing the ball carrier. But I think that's kind of a function of position. He's someone who can take on double teams. He can do all those, in the trench things that don't show up on a game day or don't show up in stats or on film. But when you see for me, it's the potential of what this dude can do. And he's a little undersized, and that's why he fell to the 4th round. And there were questions: is he a 3rd down pass rusher? I think when he came out as an 18-year-old or whatever he was, yeah, he's not he's an 18-year-old nose tackle going to the NFL. He's not a polished but I think give him 3-4 years of good solid coaching, and if he takes that coaching. Coming out as one of probably the strongest guys in that draft or even in the league. I mean, yeah, I'm just really enamored with what I think he could do. I don't think he's that guy right now, but I'm looking at 3-4 years at the end of his contract when they are extending him, giving him that second contract to keep him in Bengal uniform for 5 or 6 years beyond that. I'm very hopeful that he is that guy who I saw at Baylor on those films.
Agreed. And weight room warrior, I think he set state records, whether it was, I think, high school or college in bench press and leg press. He's just a monster. I think it's more in college relied on athleticism and strength, and he could get away with it. Whereas in the NFL, it's a little more technique based. Obviously, the injury set him way back. But I would my favorite pick of that class. And that's saying something. I really like William Jackson and Boyd as I mentioned earlier. But to me, he just needs to show more. He needs to get more time, and I think the upside is huge there. But no pun intended. But I think I think it's a risk. We talked about Vita Vea earlier in the show. I think it's a risk if the Bengals don't at least explore other options, not to necessarily supplant him, but maybe rotate and get some things going up front, just because he was inconsistent last year in his first year kind of in the lineup. So, Scott, you have number 5 is John Ross, and number 4 is Andrew Billings, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So number 5 for me was Tyler Boyd, and number 4 very well could be, in some arguments, number 1 in terms of overall talent, in terms of athleticism, in terms of upside, all of that stuff. I'm going with John Ross at number 4. I think in terms of everything he does as an athlete and as a receiver, yes, we heard he didn't run right routes last year. Yes, we heard that he didn't, do things the right way, quote unquote, for Marvin, but it's unbelievable. You can't coach some of the traits this guy has. And go back and look at some of the training camp video when he was kind of healthy and starting to get into practices last year. He was beating cornerbacks routinely. Granted, it's practice. I get it. But he was beating, and it wasn't just go routes. It wasn't simple things. It was, sideline little post routes and flag routes, whatever. All of these routes that wide receivers are asked to do. And in practices, at least, he looked the part. He kind of screwed up once, essentially, aside from being kind of injured. And then we never kind of heard from him again. So I think it's very, very easy that we could see him being one of, if not the top young talent on this team, just even after the beginning of 2018. But for me, I think the sky's the limit for him as long as he stays healthy and as long as the coaches are willing to play him. And for me, I haven't been enamored, and spoiler alert, Alex Erickson didn't make my list. I have not been enamored with, or I was not enamored with the return game last year. And if you're not going to give Ross the touches if he's healthy on offense, look at his college tape as a return guy. He's got, I think, 3 or 4 return touchdowns as a return man. Get that electric guy the ball in his hands on returns and see what happens. I think he's a dynamic player. You picked him at number 9 for a reason, whether that was the owner's choice or the coach's choice or what have you. He was number 9 for a reason, and I think he's going to be, if used properly, I think he's a Deshaun Jackson, if not better, type of player.
Yeah, I can't disagree with all the positive you said. I think it's just a matter of we just have to see him used and on the field I mean, with all these guys, we just have to see them play these folks to get that validated that they are who we hope they are. I mean, you mentioned top 9 pick. That let's put him on the field. Okay, so he ran a bad route because that was the one pass all year Dalton actually threw in stride. Or, okay, you let him touch the ball once and he fumbled. You don't set him on the bench for the rest of the year. So, yeah, let's get him out there and see, is he as good as we hope he is?
Yeah, and side note real quick, there was an interesting comment in the YouTube chat, Scott, from Scott Grubbs, saying back to Ross, he won't live up to his potential with Dalton at quarterback. Dalton lacks deep ball touch. Everything deep is on a rope. The reason he underthrows or overthrows so much. Well, I will say Dalton isn't the most effective deep ball thrower in the NFL. I think it's gotten a lot better over the past couple of years than it was in his first couple of years. But also, that's not just what John Ross does. John Ross is a yards after the catch guy. It's not just throwing it deep. I get Scott's, and there is merit to his argument. You can throw a slant to this guy, and he could take it to the house. You can throw a bubble screen to this guy, he could take it to the house. You can throw an out route. I mean, that's why you drafted this guy, correct, Scott?
Yeah, well, assuming they use him in that role. I mean, right. Clearly, with that speed, the thing you most expect him to be, especially early on, until he learns the nuances of some of the routes and how to adjust based on what the cornerbacks or the defense is giving him. And a lot of those additional things that being a receiver, the one thing you would have to assume you can do is run straight and run straight fast. You would think that's the route you've got, at least be starting with this guy, is just run straight, run deep. Hopefully Dalton gets it somewhere near you. And as you get more experience, you add these other things in. You add these nuances of, doing some of these, post routes and some of these other routes that are a little more intermediate, that are shorter, that get you the ball in space. So you can then use your speed and outrun the whole defense and turn that, 10-yard catch into a 40-yard gain. And so, everything you said, I would agree. Assuming they're going to give him the chance to try that.
Yeah. And there's the whole decoy effect, right? I mean, now Eifert's back, if he's healthy. AJ Green's going to be on the field. LaFell, he's whatever, but he can make the occasional play. Tyler Boyd. I mean, someone's going to be, if all those guys are out there and the Bengals are proving to be potent and maybe they can run the ball a little more effectively, someone's going to be left open. I mean, that's kind of how it goes. There's only so many guys you can cover, double cover, that sort of thing. So, maybe it's not even about Dalton. Maybe it's just like, hey, get it there because he's freaking wide open, right? So anyway, I thought that was just an interesting comment by Scott Grubbs in the YouTube chat. So Scott, we're up against it a little bit, but I want to get through this. So you had John Ross, you had Andrew Billings, your number 3.
Okay, my number 3 is going to be my next 3 are. I mean, they're going to be in line with all the voting we've seen. There's no surprises except maybe the order. Number 3 for me was Carl Lawson. And the reason I have him at 3 instead of 2 or 1 is, I mean, obviously he was a heck of a pass rusher. I mean, a very pleasant surprise from the time he showed up in OTAs and then in camp. I mean, he carried it all the way through. Everything he showed in OTAs, he showed in camp. Everything he showed in camp, he showed in the season. The reason why I had him at 3 instead of 2 or 1, I mean, I think most fans know the positives. The way he's able to get past offensive tackles with multiple moves, going around the edge, bull rushing, everything he does, he was built to, I mean, it's almost like he was born to rush the quarterback. That being said, I'd like to see more out of him as far as a run defender. He's had some good tackles. I mean, I think he's a good a solid run defender, but given his size, if you look at the number of snaps he was in where they ran the ball versus the number of tackles they actually got, he has some, I think there's definitely room for improvement in that field. I mean, if you're looking at production, I get why you would probably want him higher on the list. That seemed to be the big debate on Cincy Jungle was he had more production than Mixon. People think Mixon is probably a higher ceiling guy. So who do you put 2? Who do you put 3? For me, it was Lawson at number 3.
Okay, so Ross, Billings, Lawson for you.
Yep.
5, 4, 3. Okay. My number 3, and I debated on this one, and unfortunately, it comes down to, and spoiler alert, they're both guys who were rookies last year. The weighing it for me came down to productivity, and it came down to honestly positional value. So at number 3, I went Joe Mixon, and there's also the intangible, and I hate to bring this up. I don't want to talk about it. But there's also a potential reliability issue down the road. And this is totally arbitrary because it's our game and we can play how we want. But Joe Mixon is my number 3, young Bengals talent. And I'll get to the reason why somebody else beat him out at number 2. But, obviously the skill set, the size. There was a picture. This doesn't really mean too much, but there was a picture in the offseason of, I believe it was Todd Gurley, it was Melvin Gordon, it was Adrian Peterson, and it was Mixon all together working out in the summer or something before training camp. Mixon towers over like all he's a big guy. He's a big guy for a running back, and he can catch the ball really well. He's kind of got that fun attitude on the field, and he can kind of do a lot of things. I guess I'm unfairly knocking him a little bit because not all of his overall struggles were his fault. I think that a lot of that had to do with the offensive line, scheme issues, inconsistency at offensive coordinator, not playing early on in the season as much. So, but he very well could be the offensive MVP of the Bengals in 2018. But, I just, in terms of production carry, there's just a lot of things to me that knock him down just a little bit to number 3. Again, like Ross, a guy that I think could very well be the best young player on the Bengals as we maybe do this next year. But so for me, I have Tyler Boyd, I have John Ross at 4, and I have Joe Mixon at 3. And I like what he brings. But I think there's this issue with not only the position but the guy and what we saw out of his rookie year in terms of a little bit of consistency issues. So that's kind of why I went with him at number 3. Who's your number 2 guy? Scott, I think I know who it is.
Yeah, based on the voting, it's either going to be William Jackson or Mixon. I'm not pulling a surprise and going with Ethan Carter. I prefer catches more than drops, so I don't like tight ends who can block. But anyway, yeah, as far as my number 2, for me, it's Joe Mixon for many of the reasons you mentioned. When I did the scouting reports for the running backs from last year's draft class, he was by far and away the guy I was the most enamored with before the draft started. Over Christian McCaffrey, Leonard Fournette, I kind of had him as like my clear number 1. Kamara was kind of like and Cook were kind of like 2A and 2B with like a sizable gap. Then you had a big drop to the rest of the field, which was Fournette and all the other guys. But yeah, for me, just the elusiveness, the vision. I mean, the way he runs with the ball in his hand. I mean, the way he can make people miss, the way he can deceive defenders, and how he cuts and sells one lane and then goes another way. The way he finds lanes that aren't there. I mean, you look at all the video in Oklahoma, it's just absurd. And even I think you said the catches he makes. I mean, he is under recognized for his pass blocking and pass catching, and then you look at the Bengals games, and yeah, he got 3.5 yards a carry, and his production was really crappy. But you look at how many times was he tackled behind the line of scrimmage for a 4-yard loss, 5-yard loss. Like the Browns game, he had like back-to-back, not minus 10 yards. So minus 20 yards on 2 catches, that's not going to help your average any. And you look at go back and look at the video. I mean, how many of those plays did he have to make 3-4 guys miss just to get 0 yards? When he had a 1 or 2 yard gain, it's not like a guy who gets the ball, he runs, 1 or 2 yard, has a little blocking in front of him, hits the wall, falls down. I mean, here's a guy that's getting them on the backfield. The defensive tackle's in his face because he ran over, Russell Bodine. He's shifting, making him miss. Then he's avoiding another guy because one's converging, because I know the tackles can't pass protect, so they don't have to play a lot of guys deep, so they're all coming in. And he's, the things he's doing to get 0 yards. Like, now, I'm not saying it's Barry Sanders, but it reminds me to a lesser extent. When you see those videos of Barry Sanders where he's running, 30 yards, making 10 guys miss to get a 2-yard gain. And in some ways, it kind of reminded me of that. It's like, man, if this guy had any sort of blocking where he could do that, not to get up to the line of scrimmage, but if you could get that blocking like into the guys like Chris Benson and Rudy Johnson, or Cedric Benson and Rudy Johnson had, where they could run 4 or 5 yards untouched. I mean, if you gave him that kind of blocking and then let him, use that elusiveness, those moves to make people miss in the, once you're into the secondary and not on your side of the line of scrimmage. I mean, I think he could be a huge producer if given the blocking. I'm seriously, would really hope, and actually in our comment section on the YouTube, Michael Myers made a great point. He said, fixing this line makes me excited to see Mixon play. And I totally agree with that. I mean, if Cordy Glenn is healthy all year, if they get, a center, James Daniels or whoever it is, and they get that right tackle, if they can fix the offensive line and you get into September or October and you're giving his team blocking, you're giving Andy Dalton time to throw so the defense can't play, up against the line of scrimmage, and you let this guy play in space, I really want to see what he can do. So for me, he should be number 2.
Yep. And just a side point to that, and I guess I'm going to sound old school, whatever about it, but that's something as we go back and looked at our topic earlier about, is running back potentially a need and all of that. The AFC North, every single team in the division plays outdoors. Every single team in that division they're tough games. Even the Browns, for the most part. And by the way, go read a nice article my friend Scott here wrote about the Browns and their moves this offseason and if they've surpassed the Bengals. That was a fun little article too. But when the problem is the weather gets bad the last couple of months of the season, and each of those teams needs to be able to either have a quarterback that can withstand those elements or be able to run the football. And the Bengals, Dalton has played some decent in December, but he doesn't have the arm of Ben, he doesn't have the arm of Flacco, even though he's been statistically more productive than Flacco. You got to be able to at least have some semblance of balance or lean on the run game even further. And the Bengals have not been able to do that. With Mixon back and healthy, potentially a revamped offensive line, Gio there, maybe another face in there that can kind of mix out there and do some things. I think that's going to be a very effective way for the Bengals to potentially be competitive and back into playoffs in 2018. So I don't disagree with you. I'm not going to beat this drum for a long time. Number 2 for me is Carl Lawson, and really it was a tough call for me, but the reason why I think Carl Lawson is up there is simply production per snap. And I mean, it's almost like every single time he was out on the field, every single time, he was a backup, a rotational guy, he was either pressuring the quarterback, he was bringing the quarterback down, or he was in the backfield doing something, disrupting a play. And it was uncanny. And I guess also I look at the value of an edge rusher position, and I also look at the value the Bengals got out of a 4th round player. And I was shocked that they ended up getting him. He was one of my favorite picks of the draft, and I liked a lot of them last year. I think he is a guy, if he stays healthy, which was the issue in college, if he stays healthy, gets more snaps, if he maintains that production per snap, that's like silly. It's silly. Second on the team in sacks with 8.5. Atkins. He beat out Carlos Dunlap in terms of sacks on the year and just continuously pressured the quarterback. It's not even just the quarterback sacks. The one thing he needs to improve on, and I don't want to bang on the guy too much, but he needs to be able to force more strip sacks and force the ability for the Bengals to create a turnover. If he's getting to the quarterback that often, or if he's pressuring the quarterback that often, whether it's a strip sack, whether it's forcing a quarterback into an errant throw, I'd like to see them get more turnovers based on what he does. But production per snap, oh my gosh, the guy was absolutely ridiculous. That's my number 2 young player. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts, Scott. You're welcome to it.
Yeah, I'd say, I think we have a lot of similar players, and it is nice to see you finally go defense. I was kind of wondering if you were going to go offense after having Boyd, Ross, and Mixon. Like, maybe this is going to run. Or maybe you'll throw a curveball and Jake Elliott out there and then say, "Oh wait, I can't do that."
I'm not that biased. Hey, I'd love to. We'll get to it in a minute, but I'd love to throw some other guys in there. But yeah. So for me, I've got Boyd at 5, Ross at 4, Mixon at 3, Lawson at 2, and for Scott, you have Ross at 5, Billings at 4.
Lawson and then Mixon.
Mixon.
I'm going to assume we have the same number 1, so I am just going to speak very sparingly on him and let you add whatever you want to. For me, I will just say, now if we end up with a different number 1, then okay, then maybe I should have said a little more. But the one thing
mine's Kent Perkins.
Okay. No, I didn't know if it's him or Josh Topu. I thought we were switching the defense. It might be, but. Nothing against those guys. They're obviously good, solid players, and But that being said, the one thing for me this player screams is why there's value in picking the best player available and not just reaching for a need. You look at 2 years ago when the Bengals were in the draft, they were picking at 21 or whatever it was, which seems to be a common spot for them. But and interestingly, they got that pick from the Bills, who lost in the wild card game. The Bengals perpetually lose in the wild card game, and they get like that pick right around 21, 22. Anyway, sorry. They had Adam Jones was coming off a solid year. They had Dre Kirkpatrick finally getting a chance to start. You had first-round pick or Darqueze Dennard sitting there. You seem to have a pretty solid secondary. That didn't seem to be a spot you had a need in. What do they do? And everyone's like, they need a wide receiver. They need a wide receiver, whether it's Doxson or Coleman, whoever it is, Michael Thomas. The guys that they supposedly were going to grab, like Will Fuller, went right in front of them. They grabbed some guy named William Jackson from Houston. And like, who? And I know some people knew him. A lot of the fans, I think, were kind of like, okay, I don't know much about this guy. Houston really wasn't a program of any note until their coach showed up very briefly. Anyway, this just shows the value in picking the best player available, because he was hurt all last year, but this year he finally got in, and wow, he is everything you kind of hoped they were getting when they picked Darqueze Dennard and Dre Kirkpatrick. I mean, when he finally got a chance to really get significant snaps as the season went on, against very good wide receivers, he was just a great defensive, player. And the things you can do as a shutdown corner, what that gives your defense to be able to say, the opposition has an Antonio Brown or whoever that they throw to all game long. Yeah, we're just going to stick this guy on him 101, leave him alone on island, and just, we know that part of your offense is shut down. Come at us with whatever you have. And just the flexibility that gives your defense is just, especially in a passing league, is amazing. So for me, without a doubt, I think it's William Jackson. It's based on a very limited sample of 1 year, but obviously we're looking at guys who are entering their third year, so there's not a huge sample to go off of. We're kind of basing it off of what we've seen, what the projections are. So for me, it's William Jackson, and I'll stop there.
Yeah, for those of you, I've seen a little spike in some viewers over the last couple of minutes. For those of you who are joining us late, and thank you for joining us regardless, Scott and I are finishing up the show here with our top 5 young Bengals talents on the roster at this moment. Obviously, the 2018 class, we have no idea who's going there. And we're talking about guys who are entering their third year, so drafted in 2016 or 2017. Those are our top 5 guys, and Scott has revealed his top 5. Scott, your top 5 is John Ross at number 5, Andrew Billings at number 4, Carl Lawson at number 3, Joe Mixon at number 2, and William Jackson at number 1. I went with Tyler Boyd at number 5. I went with John Ross at number 4. I went with Joe Mixon at number 3. And I went with Carl Lawson at number 2, and I'm not going to disagree with my co-host, and I'm going to go with William Jackson. I'm going to just say a couple of additional comments for the sake of time. You may not have had William Jackson on your radar a little bit, Scott, when the draft rolled around, or many fans didn't. Not to single you out, my friend. But I looked at him, and I saw a guy that was potentially a second-round talent, kind of pre-combine. I did a pre-combine draft, and a guy that was a second-round talent. He's got a lot of athleticism and all this stuff, good tape, a lot of turnovers. And then the combine happened, ran like a 4.37, jumped out of the stadium and did all these things that matched the tape. This guy is just a freak. And I think – aside from making some great plays and Antonio Brown, hopefully that's a theme for years to come, because both of those guys are going to be with their respective teams probably for a lot of years and going up against each other. My thing that amazes me is, he's technically sound, he's really fast and all that. But my thing, and it's rare that it happens, but when he gets beat, his recovery ability is unbelievable. There was a play, if you go back to that, I believe it's the Monday night game against Pittsburgh last year. There was a play where Antonio Brown and Ben Roethlisberger was kind of open in the end zone. Ben Roethlisberger threw a pretty solid ball, hit him kind of in stride. William Jackson was beat by about 2 or 3 steps. His closing ability, and he closed in on it and knocked the ball out, like stripped the ball out of Antonio Brown's hand. That should have been, against probably 97% of other cornerbacks in the NFL, a touchdown. I was just like, wow, the fact that, and that goes in a column for him as a pass defended, but it's kind of like one that should have like 14 asterisks next to it, right? I mean, it's like it was just a play. Do you remember that play?
I'd love to say I do, but I think anything beyond a couple months, I think I'm too old.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you. It was just, that to me, aside from, the Aaron Rodgers pick and a couple other, batted balls here and there, that was one to me where that wasn't him being a great corner. That was him being a great athlete. And most of the time he's both that athlete and his corner skills kind of failed him. And he's still, and it was a critical play in the game. So at any rate, I think there are a lot of reasons to like him. Again, sample size is still really small, and it appears as if the Bengals are going to allow him to start this next season because they allowed Adam Jones to they opted out of Adam Jones's contract. Not that Adam Jones allowed it, but it appears that he's going to start. And the trio you're going to see on the field a lot in terms of a cornerback is Darqueze Dennard, William Jackson, and Dre Kirkpatrick. And that's okay. I think that's a pretty solid group. 3 first-round picks right there. You're going to see more out there as well. Kavari Russell and others probably will get some time. Josh Shaw. But I just am – he's one of those guys that when healthy and he's out there and you give him the chance, it's kind of like a whoa guy. And I want to add we're going to only do one more list, but I want to get your final thoughts on this topic since this is your baby here. But to me – this list of the guys that we named, yes, there's already production there, but there's also a lot of what ifs. There's a lot of what if they get more playing time? What if they stay healthy? What if they keep producing at the rate that they've produced? What if John Ross becomes a Deshaun Jackson? What if Joe Mixon becomes an Adrian Peterson light who can catch? What if William Jackson is the next shutdown corner? All of a sudden, this team is like, whoa. If they shore up defensive line and offensive line issues, whoa.
And that's, I think, the big question is the offensive line, defense, especially the offensive line issues. I mean, I think with most people would have to agree that going into last year, that was the one question mark. I think the roster from top to bottom outside of offensive line was better than the 12-4 roster, but we saw how we tend to ignore offensive line and defense because it's not a stat position. It's not a position and we've gotten very spoiled with some very good offensive linemen over the years. Andre Smith had some good years. Whitworth was obviously great for many years. We had guys like Bobby Williams in there, Nate Livings, Kevin Zeitler, et cetera. Sorry, Evan Mathis. Anyway. We've had some but you notice as soon as that offensive line goes from great to awful, everything just falls apart. And that's the one thing is, are they, and I think Bengals fans, especially after Cordy Glenn trade, have a lot of hope that line will get fixed, bringing in the coach who turned Dallas's line into a great line. And they're definitely not there yet. They made one nice move. There's many more to make, I think, to get to that point. I think we're optimistic that they will make those. I think after the draft, we will know if they're making those moves or not. But, yeah, if they make them, I think that can go a long way, assuming they make the moves that Bengals fans are kind of hoping. I think, most Bengals fans are hoping that a right tackle and a guard and a center, at least one or two of those three, if not all three, are taken somewhere in the first half of the draft. If that doesn't happen, I think there's going to be a lot of confusion, a lot of angry comments on the blog. I think that's going to go a long way, at least in our mind, to how we project the season to unfold. Yeah,
I think it's front seven defense and interior offensive line, maybe even a tackle there. I think that has to be where it goes. Scott, I will never tell you again that we're going to do a short because, and that has not happened. We got a little bit of a late start, and I apologize, but I only have time for one more question, but this is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. You can get this show on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, at cincyjungle.com. You can get in touch with the program on Twitter at BengalsOBI, and you can also get the program. You can get in touch with the program via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. I lied. We're actually going to do 2 questions, I believe, unless we may have the same question question, but the one I saw, I believe it was from our friend Dean in the chat room, Mr. Award winner of Devil's Advocate Award of the evening. He asked if we think that the Bengals will try and draft their franchise kicker or a long-term kicker again this year. Obviously, they G. Bullock last year. They drafted Jake Elliott. It looked like even though it was a close battle in preseason, it looked like they still may go Elliott. He doesn't get it. He wins, not that he was the reason, but he wins a Super Bowl with Philadelphia, whereas Randy Bullock was either eating cheeseburgers or playing golf or both, or I don't know. But was that the question, first of all, that you wanted to answer?
Yes, actually, we do have one question.
All right.
I did not think we were going to pick the same question, but
yeah, same page, buddy. Same page. Yep, saving time. So go for it, my friend. I know you have been the Jake Elliott guy. So what do you think?
I think the answer to Dean's question is yes. I think they're going to try to find their franchise quarterback or their franchise kicker, because I don't think they have him on the roster. The quarterback that we can set for another date. But I think they have to. I think they showed last year they're willing to draft a kicker. I think they finally realized guys like Nugent and Bullock are nice, adequate stopgaps. They're not the answer. I think there was a reason they brought him in. There's a reason midway through the season when Bullock was struggling, they were saying, yeah, he's our kicker for this week. Because I think I'm hoping they're finally at that point where they realize we just can't rely on these guys. We just kind of have to hope and pray, make their kicks, who many teams have passed on because they just aren't great NFL kickers. That being said, I think they find him and draft him. I hope they keep him this time. And if they do, I think from the initial looking I've done, I think it's got to be either Daniel Carson or Eddie Pinheiro. I've been very impressed with what I've seen from them as far as their accuracy on short kicks, long kicks, kickoffs. I mean, they probably grade out, in my mind, better than Elliott did last year, and he was my top kicker in last year's draft. So at this point, I'm kind of leaning towards one of them if they go that route. So yeah, so for Dean, I'd like this. I think the answer is yes. I'm hoping it's one of them, but if that doesn't mean he's going to be on the roster in January or September 2nd or 3rd or whatever. We just kind of have to hope so.
Yeah, Randy Bullock's on a 1-year contract. Again, another one of those rental deals. They have Jonathan Brown on the roster. He was a practice squad guy last year. And, if the Bengals I think they are going to as well, look for a kicker to, potentially be a long-term solution. But it's not going to be till day 3, guys. I mean, that's the reality. So don't think it's going to be some random Roberto Aguayo or some crazy type of scenario, and I don't think there are those type of guys necessarily in this draft anyway. Not that Roberto Aguayo ended up panning out anyway, but I think for one, who it is, who their fit is, and obviously it's a guy that's going to have to be able to kick and weather. That's this isn't a team that plays its games at home at domes. 4 other games on the road in their division are outdoors and in bad weather. So this is going to have to be a guy with probably a strong leg and obviously an accurate leg, but somebody that's used to kicking in elements. But I do think that they're going to bring in another compete at least, and hopefully it's something that the Bengals make a viable option. Again, I don't think this is going to be a sexy draft. I think it's going to be a front 7, offensive line, probably kicker, maybe a sprinkling in of wide receiver, safety, running back, somewhere in some of those picks. But, I expect kind of, I've said it before, the meat and potatoes in this draft. And that's okay. The Bengals drafted Flash last year and, years before that. So, it's time to kind of bulk up with some of the underrated type of positions in the draft. Thanks for the question, Dean. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I told you how many different platforms you can get it. Get the show, get in touch with us, subscribe to the YouTube channel, do all that. Scott, thanks for coming on, my friend. Appreciate you and your insight. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, on this live show. And we're inch closer to the draft, and it's going to be a fun one. So keep it here. Keep it at cincyjungle.com. Get all the news, the insight, analysis, commentary, and we appreciate all of the support. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you next time. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast.